The kind of physical setups that we usually use in practicals are pretty static. The students will arrive, they will interact in a very controlled fashion with the experiment. They weren't getting an intuitive sense of how things fit together in fluid mechanics. So I wanted to solve that by giving a very open-ended practical.
It started out as a way to trick the students into studying because they absolutely hated the microcontrollers module. It's challenging. We had to make a plan to just make the content more engaging. And there is absolutely no other project that grabs an engineering student's imagination like a robot.
If you give students work in class, they'll look at you and just like, okay, when you're done, you're going to leave. But if we bring them to a practical environment within the laboratory, they're not just looking at me, they are hands-on the project.
We're finding most students coming into engineering degrees these days do not have much practical, hands-on, DIY type experience. We need to make sure that the students get sufficient exposure that they can safely operate in the lab environment.
We want to create a sense of curiosity and enjoyment in the course. Engineering is fun because you're solving problems and you're figuring stuff out, and we do want to have that as part of the undergraduate training.
I think students learned something about the world around engineering. Yes, you must wire a circuit, and yes, you must build an electric circuit. That's effectively the easy part. All of the other stuff around the practical engineering things is equally important, and I think sometimes even more difficult to get right.
All of these projects were integrated into a structured program. Modules either used existing practical training sessions to explore a single concept, or a series of practicals to develop a functional prototype towards a competition. At WITS we see practical lab work that is designed as a vertically integrated stream, starting with the fundamentals in the common first year, then the 2 lab work modules, preparing the students for their final year research project. These initiatives require support from faculty in terms of capital investment and support of teaching and learning initiatives to encourage student engagement. Industry support is also essential to contribute to the students' development towards workplace readiness.
If you've been given a problem to solve, you've got to look around and figure out, of all these different options, what can I use? What's the best way to go? So I kind of simulate that in a small scale by giving them a box full of all sorts of stuff. So it's pumps of various types, along with the documentation which describes the pumps, which tells you how much fluid, what height it can pump to, as well as pipe fittings and pipes, and the instruction is that they've got to pump a certain amount of water up a staircase. And they've got to choose and construct a solution, their own solution, and each one can create something that's a bit different. It gives them some hands-on feel for what I'm hoping is an intuition of how these systems operate. It's important for them to try something and then they see, oh no, the fluid doesn't go all the way up. Oh, why doesn't that happen like I expected it to? And then we tie it down to the actual principles of fluid mechanics, either the pump is not strong enough or the head is not sufficient. Their attitude towards assessment-driven learning sometimes is not particularly good, so maybe it's a bit resentful, or they're worried about it, they're not willing to experiment, they are fearful of failure. So one of the major benefits of this practical being non-assessment driven and driven more by curiosity and peer learning and sort of interaction with their peers is that they can experiment and play and experience how these physical systems, these fluid mechanic systems work without there being a risk of failure or a risk of what they see in their minds as we are not doing well enough.
We entered the practical competition with a module called Systems Engineering and Design. So the third years physically design and build their own electronic vehicle.
Each team is responsible for the design, build, manufacture, racing of one of these vehicles. In the smaller teams there is a chassis team, maybe for the mechanical aspects. There's a battery storage team for the energy supply and storage. There's a driver team, logistics, planning, race strategy. So there's these different teams then that have to relate to one another in a type of context that you will find in a real-world environment. I mean, here in the lab, it's scripted, the project is scripted, everything is provided, all the tools are provided. Whereas out there, if something goes wrong, you have to come up with more creative solutions, you have to manage it, emotions run a lot higher. It is where real interaction amongst our students happen. Part of that is where the guy next to you is another team, maybe from another university, maybe from another country. And the exposure that you see how they do things, how they operate as a team, I think that is so beneficial, and we really need that in our curriculum.
So we try to ask them questions in class to say, what can you identify within your community as a problem? So what we do when we bring it to class, we try to use principles within the engineering context to solve such problems so that they don't see those problems as just a community-based problem, but they see it as an engineering problem. We, in transportation, we basically focus in roads. So we tell them, what do you identify on your way to school? How did you get to school? You hear people talking about congestion, you hear people talking about potholes on the road. But the challenge is, how can you actually make those problems unique as per the location where they find themselves? So we bring those problems into the laboratory space. We try to simulate the laboratory or seeing it as the community itself.
The robots are actually the central theme for the whole microcontrollers module, and everything we do is about developing this robot. It teaches teamwork, it teaches responsibility, it teaches accountability, it teaches students to understand their role as future engineers within society. If you have to put your little car down there with 2,000 spectators watching on and it's not driving, you've probably let down a few people, not even counting yourself. And that's just a tiny, tiny responsibility compared to the responsibility that actually will rest on an engineer's shoulders when he or she goes into industry.
Our lab work courses are distinct courses from our engineering science courses, and the reason for this is that the skill development that we're focused on in the research stream we feel is better facilitated in a standalone course. Now at our second year level, there's a high level of integration with the engineering science courses, so you find that there are distinct labs for each of the engineering science courses in the second year course. The students are given a lot more autonomy to design their experiments, so we give them a lot more freedom to come up with their own ideas and test them out in the lab under supervision to make sure that they aren't trying to set up a lab that's not feasible for them to do or which may be dangerous for them to execute. The aspect of this lab course that we believe helps to develop our students into stronger graduates is that the content of the lab course, the technical content that is used, is actually secondary to the skills that are being developed.
Outside the curriculum, there's no time to do this. Everybody thinks our engineering students just sit around, they have time to do all kinds of competitions. That is not the case. Unless you bring it in a formal way, structured into a module, it's really not going to work.
But essentially, I think it was such a great fit that it's not really additional, it's not parallel to the work that was done already in class. It was the work that was done in class.
We can't have it sustainable if industry is not involved. So we really work very hard to keep that involvement and to also sort of pay it back a little bit in terms of showing them that the students really benefit from their inputs and their financial support to, in the end, be better engineers that they can employ. We have been able to, over the years, actually involve a number of other modules in the department also in this project. So we're actually involving second years, third years, final years, and even postgraduate students in this project, and in fact, even the community. Last year we started a robot school for the community service students to present that to school children, and we developed our own platform, and we used some of the final year students who could actually not find vacation work, and they developed the platform which comes now from the third year robotic experience.
Lab courses are by their very nature going to be resource intensive. To make sure that you've got a balance of equipment that is suitably modern, suitably flexible in terms of what it can offer to the students, that it can meet our health and safety requirements. This requires significant capital investment, which is something we've spent the last couple of years doing, but maintaining that capability and moving forward to have equipment that is going to be suitably modern is going to require a continuous capital investment in the course.
Luckily, the university has a bit of a fund for innovative projects, so I needed a little bit of a budget in order to buy all the small pumps and pipes and so forth. So there was a little bit of a capital cost requirement. The department and the faculty are very supportive of lecturers trying out new things, trying to engage the students and make sure that learning is getting better over time.
It is inexpressible, the joy on the faces of these students when you really achieve something that you struggled with. It's different. I've never seen students cheer at the end of a lab practical. There you see it. You see the real world, the experience. It makes engineering alive for us.
The students benefit a lot because this time around they are more engaged. The performance is increased and the way they think, the way they articulate problems in ways within the engineering context begins to become more exciting. And you begin to see improved performance in how they respond to questions even in the exams.
We've seen a general improvement in their preparedness for conducting their own experiments in the lab.
So we really aim to provide a good learning experience that students will treasure for the rest of their lives. I think it's important also that students think back to their studies and think it was good, even though it was hard. It is hard, but it must be good too.
So advice for other people who are thinking about these kind of practicals or a different way of approaching it is, try it. If it fails, that is okay. Initially, when I was first proposing this idea, I was worried that we have to prove that it's going to be educationally sound first. If you don't try it, you won't understand what works and what doesn't work. And sometimes these interventions that we try don't really work, and then we have to modify them and figure out, okay, what is it that failed?
The first thing that someone would need to consider is to develop a skills roadmap from whichever lower year of study all the way to the final year of study of the students they are going to be facilitating, so that they can clearly target what is the expected skill level of students coming into the course, as well as the expected skill level of students leaving the course. But I think having a clear developmental roadmap for the students that you can also communicate to them, to explain to them what is going on in the course so that they can understand and participate in their own developmental process is very important.
People buy into an effort like this and it just develops over time. Things don't happen overnight. It takes a long time. This project has been going for 10 years and there's still a lot of things that can be done.
I'll advise you to go for it because you might think you're the one giving only to find out that you end up receiving from your students, because these students are highly equipped with knowledge that they don't even have ideas about. We are not preparing them based on the principles that we used. We are preparing them for the principles yet to come.
All these initiatives engage students because students are able to connect what they learn to what they will do. Connecting theory with practice. What happens to students when they are working in a team towards a common goal? For example, while the student is kept focused on the robot car, they are dealing with team dynamics that lead to certain stresses, frustrations, and uncertainties. The facilitation of such a program can then also include resolving team tension, communication, planning and executing, risk and time management, rather than just following instructions towards completing a robot car. The technical content is unchanged, but the intention of the facilitation is broader. Finally, we add reflection, not on what they have technically developed, but what they have discovered through experience about interpersonal relationships and its impact on their success. We close this loop when they can formulate and integrate what they have learned in practice.